Hi, I'm Jose, and I work as a developer relations engineer on the Google Pay team. Today, I'm going to show you how to create a multi-purpose pass that you can add to Google Wallet using the Google Wallet API, previously known as the Google Pay API for passes. Let's get started. Even if this is the first time you're exploring the Google Wallet API, in this workshop, you'll learn how to use the new generic pass type to create passes that adapt to your needs. Check out the session Introducing Google Wallet and Developer API Features to learn more about Google Wallet and generic passes. To make the integration more illustrative, you'll temporarily impersonate a developer from the Google I/O team to create a hypothetical and revolutionary badge that, in addition to providing identification, lets attendees collect points every time they meet someone new. By integrating with the Google Wallet API, you'll be able to create passes that can be saved to Google Wallet. The integration flow on Android is typically, first, sign up to Google Pay and Wallet console and get an issuer ID. Second, define the type of pass and create a new pass object for a user. Third and finally, integrate the API on Android to add the pass to Google Pay and once launched to Google Wallet. This workshop focuses on implementing the Android SDK in your application, so you don't need to complete steps 1 and 2. Instead, I'll briefly touch on each of them so you have some context when you're ready to integrate your own passes. Google Pay and Wallet Console is your go-to place to manage all your new and existing integrations with Google Pay and Google Wallet APIs. You can see how they perform over time and add support for the business and developer-focused products. The console also helps you seamlessly integrate Google Pay and Google Wallet APIs, discover resources, get support at different stages throughout your integration, and keep track of your progress along the way. To get started, head to g.co/paywalletconsole and create your business profile. Next, head over to the Google Wallet API section and request access to the API to get a production-ready issuer ID. Once you're granted access to the Google Wallet API, you can start creating passes. There are 2 resources in the API that help you do that. First, pass classes. Think of classes as templates with common information that all your passes belonging to a program or event share. All pass objects belong to a class. And second, pass objects, which serve a concrete purpose associated to your activity as a business and your users. For example, an entry ticket, or a loyalty card for your loyalty program. Each of these items are associated with a previously defined class and inherit common properties from it. Any changes to the pass class or the pass object are propagated to the user immediately. Now coming back to the workshop. To help you get started with the Android integration, we have prepared a sample generic pass model and a test account that you can provision to complete the integration without signing up or completing a backend integration yourself. To do that, head over to g.co/wallet/labtools, enter your email address, and click Create, as I'll be doing on screen. Make sure to choose an email address that you can access from the Android device you're intending to test. That is, this email address needs permission on your issuer account so that the pass can be saved, because this is a test account. Make sure to enable the checkbox to create a generic pass class with your account. And as you hit Create, all this content will be created for this workshop. All right, so you have the result. Now keep this window somewhere in the back of your computer because you will need it later on. But as you can see, we have identifiers for the issuer ID, for the pass class ID, and the owner of that account. Now this is what the class object that you just created looks like. This is the structure of the object. The modules data fields let you specify additional information in the form of images, text, and links. This information can be referenced from multiple sections in the pass. The class template info lets you override the layout of the pass and change how the different bits of information are shown. Note how in this example, you use the card template override property to include one additional row below the top row using a 2-item layout, which includes 2 more fields at the sides of the pass. And the details template override to add a details section for the pass with an image, additional text, and a link. In a typical integration scenario, you create classes and optionally objects from a confidential system, for example, a backend server, and issue queries against the Google Wallet API with the appropriate information to create passes. For example, you can create a new class from a private or admin tool in your company when you start a new program, and issue a new object when a user requests a new pass from a client application. This is how the generic pass used in this workshop looks. A generic pass gives you extra flexibility to structure and design your passes to adapt to your needs. You can configure a number of attributes such as the barcode or a QR code or the main image in the pass. Later in this workshop, we'll take a more detailed look at the properties available and configure the pass accordingly. With that, let's go take a look at the integration in your Android application. Feel free to digest this workshop at your own pace, pausing on sections of the video that you'd like to spend more time on. So first, I'll show you how to configure your Android application and give you users a way to add the pass to Google Wallet. You can use your own Android application to continue with the integration, or if you prefer, use our sample application as a model. If you decide to use our sample application, you can clone the repository using the following commands. Once cloned, open Android Studio to start the integration. So in the project menu wizard, hit on the open button, and then locate your project in your local file system. Make sure to select the Kotlin module, which is where the integration will happen. Now, as you can see, there is a list of convenient comments throughout the code that will help you complete this code lab. The first step is to use the API to add the GMS Play Services Pay. We'll do that in the build Gradle file for your application module, right below the indication comment right here. So using the implementation tag, you load the Google Android GMS. You see on the autocomplete that it's giving me version 16.03, which is the latest right now. Now make sure to hit on the Gradle sync button to make sure the dependencies, if needed, are downloaded and made available to you. Now the next step is to add the Google Wallet button to your user interface. You configure the button to show on the screen according to the brand guidelines and trigger the safe flow for the previously created pass. To do that, visit the button guidelines page and download the SVG files for the button with the appropriate color themes and languages. The repository that you're using, if you're using our sample application, already contains a vector drawable added to the resources. If you're following the workshop using your own application, you can import vector assets on Android Studio using the file new vector asset, which will open a wizard where you'll have to set a name for that vector drawable and locate that file, that SVG file, in your file system. Click on Next, Finish, and that will import the vector drawable. And I'll show you how the one we're using looks like. So you will see something very similar to this one. We recommend creating a separate layout with the button that contains both the SVG asset and the background. So go ahead and add the Google Wallet button to your layout file with the following snippet. As you can see, the snippet contains two elements. I'll explain this two when we add it to Android Studio. So let's go back to Android Studio. So right click on Layout, New Layout Resource File, and let's give it a descriptive name like Add to Google Wallet button. Click on OK. Go back to the code window and paste the contents that you just copied. Now again, we have two elements. One of them is the image view that contains the SVG content of the Add to Google Wallet button file, the SVG file that you just loaded. Now, if you take a look in detail, you'll see that this only contains the foreground. The reason why we're using a frame layout to contain the background is because you can benefit from the resizing properties of Android shapes, and you can also add events and new different styles when you interact with the button. For example, when you disable it or when the button is clicked, using on newer versions of Android the ripple effect. We're using a frame layout because it's one of the simplest form of containers on Android. And if you check out the split view or the design view, you'll see how the button looks like. Great. Moving on. The last step needed is to add the layout that you just constructed to your final user interface where you're planning to show the button. So that's going to be, if you're using our sample application, that is the activity checkout. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll see another comment indicating where we think the Add to Google Wallet button should be placed. So since this is a composite layout, you'll want to use the include tag with the layout that you just created. So that is layout Add to Google Wallet button. You'll give it an ID, which is going to be a new ID called Add to Google Wallet button. Width of the entire screen, because we want the button to occupy the entire contents horizontally of the screen. So it's going to be much parent. And on the height, if you take a look at the button guidelines, you will see that the height that will need to be set is 48 dp. Finally, give it a margin top so that it's separated from the rest of the content. And with that, you'll see that nothing shows on screen. The reason for that is because the container view is hidden, it's not showing, its visibility is set to gone. So remove that briefly to see how the button will look like. And if you're happy with the outcome, you can add the visibility gone back again. We'll get to why we have that view hidden in just a second. Next, open the activity where you're planning to show the Add to Google Wallet button and instantiate a pay client object as a member of your class. This object helps you make calls against the Google Wallet API. The getClient method receives the context of the instantiating class, which in this case is the calling activity. Step number 5 on the code lab. So go back to Android Studio and open your main activity class. For those using the sample application, that's the checkout activity. And go to 3.1, where you'll create a member variable to hold the client. It's going to be a private lateness bar because we are promising the compiler that we're going to construct this variable soon, not on the constructor, but soon enough, that you'll call wallet client. And that's going to be of type payClient. And next, instantiate, as we promise, that variable in the onCreate method so that the client is readily available for you to use. And as we said, that's payClient passing the calling activity as a context. Consider placing domain-specific business logic appropriately if you're using other design patterns. For example, if you're using the model view model pattern, place your UI-related business logic in your activity or fragment. For example, Add to Google Wallet button or the activity result, and operational logic in your view model. For example, the instantiation of the client or the network call triggers. Now we have the client variable ready for us to make calls against the API. And there's one call that we'll want to make first. So before saving the pass, we'll want to verify that the API is available on the target device and respond to the result if needed. Currently, the target device needs to have Google Play services installed. And if the API is not available, consider not showing the Add to Google Wallet button. If you remember, in the UI, the container of the button was set to visibility gone. We'll want to keep it like that if the API is not available, not to confuse the user and letting them know, or in fact, not letting them know that the API is available, that they cannot use the button. So you'll do that by calling the getPayAPI status call request on the payClient. So do that in a separate function. We can call parent function fetch Google Wallet API status. And that's a call that, once again, you'll do on the wallet client. You'll see you can also complete get pay API availability status, and that will take a extra param, which is going to be the type of request that you're planning to make. That is the save passes. What we're trying to do if the API is available is to save the pass that we'll define later on. Now this returns a task. So you can simply use the pre-built callbacks to check out the outcome, the result of the task. If you are using other libraries or other tools, like for example, coroutines on Kotlin, you can very well keep on using that as well for this task. I'm gonna keep it simple and use the inbuilt callbacks. So what I like to do is, if the operation is successful, that is, if the wallet API is available, I will want to show the container of the button. So I'll go ahead, because I'm using view binding, my layout is already available, and the container of the button is called pass container. And I'm going to set the visibility to view visible. So if the API is available, that's going to show my button to add to Google Wallet on screen so that users can interact with it. If the API is not available, that's going to return through the onFailure listener. And in fact, there's one thing that we have missed in here. So we are saying if the request completes successfully, that we can show the button. Well, that's not precisely the case, because that request returned a status. So let's take a look and explore the value of that status. We'll only want to show the UI if the status is available. That is, pay API availability status is available. If it's not eligible, we want to keep the container hidden. So only if it's available, we'll show the container of the button. If this request fails, feel free to perform additional operations like login or notifying the user. In this context, we're just going to keep this as a no operation. So now the method to determine whether the API is available is ready. Now the only thing that's left is calling that method. In my own little application, I want this method to be called as quickly as possible so that I know if the Google Wallet API is available as quickly as possible. So I'm going to call this at the end of the onCreate method. You feel free to add this method to whatever it's most convenient based on the flow of your application, whether that's the onResume, the onStart, the onCreate, or somewhere else. Okay, so recapping a little bit, there's the dependencies to use the pay client. You have added the button with the vector drawable, instantiated the pay client, and now you have checked whether the Google Wallet API is available. So the next step now is to go ahead and call the save passes operation. But before doing that, let's take a step back and take a look at the object that you'll create in a second. So this is how the object looks like. These are some of the properties that a generic pass object can have. These fields, as you can see, contain visual information to display the object, like the background color, the logo at the top left, the car title, header, the barcode, or the hero image at the bottom to brand your pass according to your mark, as well as configuration associated with pass. This object is wrapped in an unsigned JWT representation, which is what the API takes. This final entire object is used to save the pass. So let me take that object. We have a set of coding here that contains the full definition of the object. So you can just copy all that and take it to your main activity class. And at the bottom of it, you can add it on step 5 in the comments. Let's quickly go through it. So as you can see, there's a set of member variables. These contain the values that you obtain at the beginning of this workshop when creating the test account. So what I'll ask you to do is go back to that window and copy those items, the owner email address, into the issuer email. The issuer ID, that's the second value. And you can use the copy button, by the way, to conveniently copy the content to the issuer ID member variable. And finally, the pass class ID into the pass class. Now, as you can see, those fields are used in the object definition. So a few things to call out is you need to set the ID of the object, which is being created with the random UUID plus the issuer ID. You have to define the class ID of that object. Remember that every object needs to be associated to a class. So you can see we're setting the background color of the pass, a logo on the top right, title of the card, some other values, as well as the hero image to brand our pass object a little bit. Now the object is created. So you're all ready to go and try to save the pass. The process of saving a pass to Google Wallet opens up a new activity where the operation is executed. Upon completion, a result is returned to the calling activity through onActivityResult. So start by creating an arbitrary request code to start the save operation and capture the result. So let's go back to the beginning of our main class and add a new member. It's going to be a private val add to Google Wallet request code. Now, if you're familiar with Android, you'll be also familiar with this concept on how activity for results work. Basically, when you launch an operation that exits your application, you need to set a code that helps you identify that operation when it comes back to your application, giving you back control with the result of that operation. So that's an arbitrary number, which for me, I'm going to set to 999 for now. Finally, the next step is you want the pass to be saved as a response of the user clicking the Add to Google Wallet button. So you can go to step 6.2 on your own create method or whatever is most convenient for you, setting up your layout, and grab the item, the Add to Google Wallet button item, get the root of it. Remember that we created a composite view, so we need to get the root of the element to be able to set the on-click listener on it. And then to start the save operation, use the wallet client created previously, save passes, and this method takes 3 params. The first one is an unsigned JWT body with the information about the pass object defined before. So that is the object that you just defined behind the new object JSON variable. Second one is the activity where the result will be received. That's going to be right here for us on the checkout activity. And finally, you need a request code to identify the request. That's the Add to Google Wallet request code. So you have everything you need now. If you were to run this code, if the API is available, you will see the button on the screen. If you click the button, the save operation will begin. But before doing that, let's also make sure to handle the result before it comes back. So to capture the result, go ahead and implement the onActivityResult method in the calling activity. So if you go to step 7 on line 73, you'll see that the method on the sample application is already overridden. So the first thing that you want to do is ensure that the result that is coming back through onActivityResult belongs to the save operation for Google Wallet. So you do that by checking that the request code is equal to the Add to Google Wallet request code that you set when you launched the operation. Now, instead of this block, we know that we are processing the result of the Add to Google Wallet operation. And there's a number of potential results that we can get. To know which one we're getting, you can take a look at the result code. So we're going to do a 1 on the result code. There's a number of different potential scenarios that you can be in. First one is result OK. That is, everything went well and the pass was saved to your user's Google Wallet. In this case, myself, I'm not going to do anything, but in your case, feel free to notify the user if you need to. Similarly, if the user cancels the process before saving the pass, for example, by hitting on the back button or by closing the new prompt, you will receive the result cancelled. If you need to do anything here, feel free to add in here, like login or notifying your user once again. This is a very intentional operation, so I'm not going to do anything either here. Now let's get into the error land. You can also get a save passes result, save error. If there was an issue with the creation process because there was like something malformed or ID was referenced in a way that couldn't be found on the server, you'll receive that type of error. So that means that there's something that you can do to fix it. This error will contain information instead of the intent. So what you can do is check on the data intent and see if it's not null. And if it's not null, try to process the result. And we'll do it through the intent data variable for this purpose. So once again, this will contain information. So be able to unpack, make sure to unpack it. There's a string extra that comes with it. So you can go ahead and select the string extra from the intent data. And the extra is on the pay client, extra API error message, right? You can assign that to a variable, for example, API error message, then inspect that and decide what to do next. You may want to log something to your backends. You may want to let the user know. You may want to update the object once again to see if you can fix it, right? So we'll say handle the error. Now there are a number of other types of results that you can get, which I'm not going to go through. The other results are basically non-actionable. That means that something failed on the server, in which case we recommend you to retry the request. And if the error is not transient, that is, the error keeps on happening, we recommend you to treat the API as being unavailable and move on. We can do that with the else. We can handle all the non-actionable errors using the else clause. Okay, so now we're handling the potential result of adding the pass to Google Wallet. And I think I have one curly brace too much in here. There we go. And this looks like it's fine. So now it's time to go ahead and test your integration. So to do that, I'm going to hit on the play button for my Pixel 4 simulator and see if I was able to complete the integration successfully. If everything goes well, an application should open. If you're using our sample application, you will see that it has like a very basic layout of a typical t-shirt shop, and the Add to Google Wallet button will appear at the bottom only, remember, if the API is available. So as it runs and installs the application, you will see the layout that we were just talking about. The Add to Google Wallet button is showing. So that means that the API is available. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it to start the save operation. That's opening the Google Wallet user interface. And it's going to show me the pass that I'm about to save if everything goes well. So as you can see, the pass was added already to Google Pay. And when Google Wallet launches, it will be added to Google Wallet. So what I can do is open the app and inspect the pass to make sure that everything looks okay. So you can see some of the properties that you set in the configuration of the object. With the logo, with the header, with the name of the attendee. Sorry, that's the card title. That's the header with the name of the attendee. This is the two-item layout, the barcode and the hero image at the bottom. We also modified the details page. So you can see that we were able to add customized elements in this section here. If you're seeing something similar, congratulations. That means that you were able to integrate the API correctly. If you see any error, keep in mind that you can move back and forth in this video and use the resources in the documentation to troubleshoot the integration. So congratulations again for making it here. You've learned how to define and save a generic pass object to Google Wallet on Android. As you saw, you can let your users save passes on Android in 3 simple steps. Take a look at a complete integration in the sample application in GitHub and the code lab for this workshop for additional guidance. When you're ready to issue your own passes in production, go to Google Pay and Wallet Console to request access to the Google Wallet API and authorize your Android application to issue calls against the API. Check out the documentation at g.co/wallet/API to learn more. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Google Pay Devs to stay up to date about the latest developer news on Google Pay and Google Wallet. And I'll see you soon.